And it's very important for me to vote against that because I think for myself, fellow councillors, and certainly the concern that the community have is there is a very real issue around the credibility of this council as it goes to the way it manages a lot of issues. And we should not be increasingly at odds with the community around a whole range of things. In fact, we as councillors, as their political representatives, should be backing them. So I want to vote against item 6 and some of the items here, and I'd like your assistance with that. The other point that I would note that goes to the community, and it goes to the additions that I was putting up, is around the goodwill, the expertise, and the considerable sums of money that the community is spending. My understanding is that the recent reviews that they've done around sedimentation have cost $25,000. That's money that's coming from donations, coming from hard work. It takes a lot of effort to raise that amount of money, notwithstanding the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I think that is correct, certainly well over $100,000, contesting the processes through the Environment Court around Long Bay, Okura and Waiiti. So I think we really need to have some acknowledgement around where the community's at around that. The other concern that I've got, and it goes to the additions around a working party, go to the urgency around this. Because every time there is a storm event, and I'll repeat that, every time there's a storm event, we have significant quantities of silt moving into the marine environment and into the marine reserve. And we have a responsibility. We have kaitiakitanga around this. And we need to take that responsibility and take it seriously. So for me, that's urgent. And as I endeavoured to point out earlier through some of the questions I was raising, is there are solutions that we actually have now that we could be implementing. And that's of major concern, and the community knows that, and they would like to see those solutions embarked on immediately. So that's all I say, Madam Chair. I would like to have the ability to vote against some of the items in this report, and I'd ask your forbearance for that.
Yeah, and I think, Councillor, you're quite within your rights to note, you know, your disagreement with paragraph XYZ. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to follow on from a couple of the issues raised here. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Great Park Society for their very significant contribution to the work that's emerged in recent months. And, you know, that's not just a very substantial financial commitment, it's also a commitment in time and effort that's been going on for many, many years. So I thank you for that, and I know this society and myself as a local council is also appreciative of the council, the interest the council's taken in the issue, and the stand it's taken in Okura through the unitary plan and subsequent appeals, and also with the scoping report too, in terms of looking at individual sites and catchments. I would say that was a process that Auckland Regional Council had begun about 12 years ago, so I'm not quite so sure that that's quite as innovative as it might appear. I do have a few comments on the report itself, and I guess just from a layperson's view, just someone, you know, listening to the Great Park Society and listening to our officers, it worries me a little bit that we seem to be missing the crux of the issue. And that really is that the level of sediment control has been insufficient to protect the marine environment. So while we've had pages on monitoring and compliance, you just have to go up there, as I have done after a significant rain event, and as Councillor Lee showed, that's what you get. So if nothing is fundamental is being done to deal with that in a timely manner, then we maybe haven't progressed quite as far as we'd think. And I guess the thing that makes me say that is this sort of implicit message that's getting put out in the update report is that sort of business as usual model will be sufficient. The business as usual model might be sufficient in other instances. Clearly, it is not sufficient here. This is meant to be an environment that has the highest standard of protection, the highest standard of care, the very top, the Rolls Royce of sediment control, we would be led to believe. And it's a vulnerable environment. So I would say that if this is business as usual for our very highest level of protection, a marine environment, then we're in a bit of trouble. And I'll just there's a number of comments I could refer to, but I think I'll focus on one, and that's the comment on point 23 to do with the aerial photos, which we have seen, you all saw in the last presentations. And if we quote the report, the aerial photos show in the public forum presentation of a plume of sedimentation discharging into the marine reserve is a typical occurrence along Auckland's coastline as a result of significant rainfall. While urban development and earthworks may be a contributing factor, there is currently no evidence that the level of sedimentation observed in a significant rainfall around Okurewaiti is any more or less typical to the rest of Auckland's coastline. My goodness gracious, if that is typical along our coastline, then we definitely are in trouble. And I would contest the notion that that is typical, because the water quality monitoring showed that sediment concentrations above the Waiti development, above it, were similar to prior to the works beginning, but afterwards were recorded up to 13 times higher for the catchment below receiving the earthwork development. So that doesn't match up, and there are any number of other statements that could be made that are really contradicted by the evidence that we have seen, both visually and in writing. So I don't proceed to go through them one by one, which I could do, but that's symptomatic of statements that are made that are patently not correct. A lot of our hopes have been put into the modelling, and it is a positive step and will be a useful tool, but it will not prevent the sediment loads going into the marine reserve. The modelling's not going to do that. It's not going to stop it. It's going to perhaps be useful in telling us where the sediment ends up or where it moves around, but it's not going to stop anything. And I guess that's, again, my layman's view is, at the end of all this, what's stopping this happening at the next rain event? Nothing. And while we have the comment being made that we're coming to the end of this earthwork site, there's actually another 400 sites to go in here.
Oh.
Another 400 at some point. I think 170 odd just coming up. So this isn't just suddenly going to clear up. This is going to be ongoing. These scenes are going to be repeated because the modelling, that's not going to stop it. The compliance isn't going to stop it because, yes, they are. It's a bit like a patient in a hospital. The patient dies but has received all the prescribed treatment. That's what we're talking about here. The patient's going to die, and we're going to say we did everything that was prescribed, but the patient will be dead at the end of it. And that's what we're talking about in this most sensitive, this most highly prized environment. So we need to do a lot better in terms of output. And while there is, progress there, it doesn't confront the real urgency of this as in a means that's required. And we have the expertise that could enable us to do that from within the community. That could do, as the Deputy Mayor said, get some effective controls, gains. If the developer is as reasonable as we have been told, then perhaps he won't want this getting reported yearly in all the local papers, these sorts of scenes appearing on the front page. So, in conclusion then, I, like Councillor Walker, can't really accept a number of the comments in the report because they're just factually incorrect.
Okay, thank you, councillor. Just remembering your patient analogy, what we're saying is we're actually taking that patient before it is completely terminal and actually reviewing the diagnosis and the drug regime. And that's what we're doing here. We're saying doing what we've always been doing might not be the right thing to be doing. How about we do it differently? And we need to acknowledge that. I'm not hearing from you and Councillor Walker that you are understanding that we are looking at a fundamental step change here, and I think we need to understand that.
Well, maybe,
I've got
hopefully if you
Councillor
recorded in the writing, that might help.
Councillor Darby, Councillor Cooper and Councillor Lee, and then I think we might be ready for recommendations.
Just very brief, and thanks for your work on this, Chair. I just want to acknowledge Local Board Chair for Hibiscus and Bays, Julia Parfitt, followed up yesterday.
Thank you.
She would be here. She's been following this intently with a number of groups, but they have a conflicting meeting at the board today, herself and the Deputy Chair, Janet Fitzgerald. She did email to you and I late yesterday wanting to see some changes to the recommendations, and I believe, Chair, the changes you've made reflect that last conversation that followed up on earlier conversations yesterday. Yeah, I do want to acknowledge the Great Park Society for their work and their technical work sitting in behind the enthusiasm. I also want to acknowledge the meetings we've had with them. Madam Chair, you've done the hard yards here. You have said kindly that this is regulatory, Councillor Cooper and myself at planning, but I do have to say that you've been shoulder to the mill on this one. So thank you, but also to Megan Tyler, who's been doing a lot of work on this, our technical staff, Dean, all of your people, and also the Wadey Bay Company, who we've also met with, and I get a sense that they have got a real willingness to get the very best outcomes there as well. So I guess what this highlights for me is, I was going to say it's a local issue, but it's a big local issue because it's a marine reserve and therefore it has national importance. But sedimentation and receiving environments is the big issue for Auckland, identified in sea change as the big issue coming out of that. Hauraki Gulf Forum's aware of that. Member Ngamani, you know that full well. And it was being advanced at the Hauraki Gulf Forum. The most recent count there was some of the member parties really not wanting to take sea change on, just wanting to note it and park it on the shelf. So there's some work for the Hauraki Gulf Forum to do for not just Auckland, our members at the Hauraki Gulf Forum. Please take your enthusiasm to the forum to get this resolved, not just as an Auckland issue, which I think we are going to embark on here, Chair, with your direction, but this goes well beyond the Auckland boundaries. This is a big issue, not just for Auckland, this is a big issue for the whole of the Hauraki Gulf, and I can tell you what, it's stuck in concrete there at the moment because of the ineffectiveness of the forum right now. So let's get the big picture done here. Councillor Newman, you've been consistent with the matters you've raised here, and I really want to acknowledge that, and I'm going to partner up with you because you do delve into these pretty deeply. You've done the hard yards as well, because I think we do need to go back and look at where we maybe fell over in proving our case. Because I know, Chair, and we had a lot of discussion in 10 to 13 particularly, and then 13-16 on this very matter, and we fell over because we just got beaten by counter-technical advice. So let's go back and review all that and resolve this. Otherwise, it's not going to be just this bay that's full of sediment. It's going to be thousands of hectares of the Hauraki Gulf, the Manukau Harbour, the Kaipara Harbour, and we've got two oceans on either side of that.
Thank you, Councillor. Well said. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to respond to the comments by Councillor Watson that the monitoring regime is just business as usual. I want to make sure that people listening to this do not think we're just moseying along. If you look at paragraph 21, it explicitly talks about Waiti development as a high priority site in terms of monitoring and one of the most intensively monitored sites in the region. And so it's not just business as usual, and the provisions that we're operating under were planning provisions approved by the Environment Court and developed as such to reflect that. So this is not business as usual. This is an exceptional area. It has very friable soils. It does have big risks. But what I wanted to say around the whole legal issues is that we could slap abatement notices off and we would be challenged because we don't have the basis for that. I think this process, Madam Chair, and thank you, because you haven't just spent months and years posturing, you've actually got on and done it, and that's what's going to make the difference. And if we get all the groups and all the parties around the table, if we go to court, this will be stuck in court for years and we will not be able to do anything. This way is the collaborative relationship way of sorting this out, and I applaud that approach because it does work. And collaboration is never easy, it's never exactly what everybody wants, but you get to a point where you find a way through, and I think this is really important. It will pick up all the strands of work that need to be done. I also want to acknowledge our staff. This wasn't sort of on the work program, but this has been quickly got together. Many officers right across council involved in this have been working really hard to get to this point, and it might not be the, gold star report we want to write. We want to get something on the books and working, and so this is the starting blocks, and I think this has been really exceptional, and I really enjoyed the opportunity to meet with the Okura Great Parks yesterday. That was a really good meeting, and I think I hope this bodes well for us continuing to work together, because we're all concerned about this. But we can't just leap in a legal manner, because we'll just be caught up in knots for years, and I don't want that. I want this sorted as quickly as possible. Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I support the resolutions.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When you look at this affair, there seems to be 4 parties which have interests involved. The first and most important is the environment and the life-supporting capacity of the marine environment in that particular area, which happens to be a marine reserve and located in the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park. Then there is the local community represented here by the Great Park Society and others, and their interest is to be able to enjoy a healthy environment, not a deteriorating environment as we've seen here. Then there is the interest of the Auckland Council, which has statutory responsibility for the area under a number of pieces of empowering legislation, not something that we would hope for one day with sea change, but actually tangible statutes given to us by the Parliament to empower us in our role to achieve sustainable management of the environment. And just to remind members, they are the Resource Management Act 1991, that was enacted 27 years ago. And then there is the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park Act, enacted in 2000. And then there is, older still, the Marine Reserves Act 1981. All of those pieces of legislation give the Auckland Council and its officers power to enforce the protection of the environment. Not just power, but obligations. So then there is the council's, that's the council's responsibility, that's the council's powers. Then there is the council's reputation, something that we all should respect and safeguard. And I'm afraid in this situation, what this report does and what these recommendations do by and large is they do not in any way, can I put it this way, help the council's reputation vis-a-vis the people of Auckland. And then finally, there is the interests of private developers, commercial interests by definition. Of all those parties, really, they're the only winner. And so this is a very sad day for Auckland if this council is not going to get on and do the job that this council is empowered and obliged to do. There's no point in people going on about sea change and the Hauraki Gulf Forum. It appears that comments made by Councillor Darby means he doesn't understand the meaning of sea change, and nor does he understand the role of the Hauraki Gulf Forum.
Hang on,
The Hauraki Gulf
Councillor-
Forum recommended
Councillor
to its
Lee,
parent bodies.
It would be really good, just stick with the issues rather
Oh,
than
well, I had to
directing it.
rebut some misinformation, really prevarication and finger pointing away from the people who are responsible. This council should get on with the job, and I have to say, this report is a cover-up, nothing more than a cover-up,
No,
and I cannot go stand by this.
Sorry,
I cannot
Councillor,
accept it.
I'm going, and you have every right to vote against it, as is your democratic right, but we reject the
Point of
idea
order,
that this is.
Madam Chair.
Councillor Cooper.
I feel very concerned about accusing the report writer of creating a cover-up in a report, and I would like that to be a withdraw and apologise on that one. That's not appropriate, and it breaches our standing orders.
I think well,
Genuinely held
it
opinion.
does, hang on.
To say a report is a
Chair.
cover-up,
I agree. I can't name the exact standing order, but we have a very clear standing order that says that you do not bring our staff into disrepute, nor do we make accusations that are groundless. Councillor, I'd ask you to withdraw. The rest of your statements stand, but I would ask you to withdraw that it's a cover-up.
Madam
that
Chair,
it's
can I
an
respond?
unfortunate statement.
Can I respond? My whole argument is to try and defend the council's reputation. By going along with this, we are not helping the council's reputation at all. We are continuing to damage the council's reputation. I will not apologise, and I will not withdraw for telling the truth as most people would see it.
then, Madam Chair, as in standing orders, can that please be noted, the comment by Councillor Lee be noted and put in the minutes? Thank you.
We'll make that as unacceptable.
Yep.
This is an issue that's been going on.
Next minute there'll be a police
This is-
raid.
Point of
hang
order,
on,
point of order,
Councillor.
Madam Chair.
Point of order, councillor.
I'm concerned about your words that just stated that we, and you used the word we, find this unacceptable. That is not my position. If you want to put that to the vote, then by all means put it to the vote.
I've no interest
But
in
my
putting it
understanding
to the
is that a
vote.
member of this council is able to have a genuinely held view.
They-
And that is my understanding of what Councillor Lee put. And I
Councillor,
might have the same view,
and-
for example.
And you might. I think it doesn't dignify this meeting by continuing this line of discussion. We were objecting to, Councillor Cooper and I, so I have every right to use the word we, were objecting to the use of the word cover-up. I totally reject that and refute that, and on behalf of the staff and the people who've been part of putting this process together, in conjunction with our community who we met yesterday, this is not a cover-up, and I reject that. Let's move on. This is not a useful discussion. Councillor Philippina,
Some
and then I'm
amendments,
going to
Madam
put it to the vote. No, Councillor, you've
I have
spoken.
some amendments,
We are
Madam Chair.
under- we will deal with the amendments.
Thank you.
Oh,
You can't put an amendment.
Can't do another amendment, we've
no,
already
we
done the
haven't.
amendment.
No, we can't. Councillor Philippina.
If you've spoken already.
Councillor Philippina.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I just, yesterday was the first meeting that I had with the Long Bay Okura Great Park Society, and I want to acknowledge Peter, Trev, Pat, and one of the interesting comments she made yesterday was she attended the first environmental court hearing about this in 1996. So I want to acknowledge her, Fiona, and also Shaw. I want to acknowledge you because of the comments that were passed yesterday. And some of them, to me, confirms the way in which we're heading is the right way to go in regards to not only across the region, but also around Okura and Waiti. And Dr. Shaw mentioned, and he said, and I remember writing it down because it was pertinent, that was one of the things he said, is that if there is compliance with the resource consent, everything is fine. But the environmental effects are getting worse. So things need to change. And I agree. You know, I totally agree with that, is that just because there's compliance, that doesn't mean that there's no effect on our environment. So I took on board. The other was Treff, and I think Treff mentioned that the standards and monitoring need to be lifted. Just complying is not enough when it comes to our environment. Totally agree. I really did. And there was another one, is that Trev said getting the balance right. That's the key thing for us, is getting the balance right. So my acknowledgement goes out to the society, and from my perspective, thank you. I think we're heading in the right direction around ensuring that you are around that table. And the evidence that you put to us yesterday is something that I ended up reading last night. And again, it gives me a heck of a lot more knowledge than what I had moving into this. So I also wanted to acknowledge the two councillors, Councillor Walker and Watson, for your advocacy. Because, you know, all the way through this whole issue, and I remember taking the unit, you know, with the unitary plan for the last 2.5 years through the hearings. I do want to acknowledge your advocacy in regards to this, because I just think that when people end up saying, look, this doesn't feel right, it doesn't look right, I think it's so important that we listen, and then we end up, okay, what do we do as a result of what we've heard? I've heard from the society, and I just love what was said yesterday, the evidence they were given, and even listening to both the councillors in that area. I look forward, Chair, to looking at methods, not only around sort of communication, but I think methods to address what we were told at the early Environmental Committee meeting, but also yesterday, and I want to be part of that. So for me, I support the recommendations, not only across the region, but again, Okura, Waiti, and that maybe needs to be treated separately than the regional scope that we have to do, because Councillor Watson mentioned 400 more's on the horizon. So I think we just need to end up talking about that collectively with our community for those affected areas. So I will be definitely supporting that, but I want to acknowledge again the society for the comments and the evidence and the work that they're doing. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Filipaina, and thank you for your role in the meeting yesterday. As the mover, I'm going to close the debate.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Councillor, you've spoken, and the advice that I have from our staff is you've spoken, we've incorporated your recommendations into the recommendations that we have here, and as you spoke and didn't put forward amendments,
point of order?
you no longer can.
Point
That
of
is
order?
standing orders. What
Point
is
of
your
order?
point of order?
You said that we, I'm assuming that it's yourself and the officers, have incorporated the amendments of Councillor Watson and myself, but you haven't had the good grace to actually put them up so that the people around this table can make that judgment. In my belief, they are not substitutive, they are additions, and they are relevant, and they meet all the necessary tests under the standing orders. If I'm mistaken, I'm happy to have a legal opinion or for an officer to comment on that, but would you be able to put them up so that the fellow councillors can vote accordingly?
So, Councillor, I thought I'd covered that. Just to be really clear, I read out your additional recommendations and explained that they had been incorporated in here. I'm not too sure if the staff have typed them up. So we're just, so you'll see that we've asked and we've put in the recommendations, the working party be set up.
There isn't a working
The-
party in
a
the
working-
recommendations. It says working methods.
We're doing a little bit of semantics here. We want to place particular emphasis on catchments and sensitive marine environments. We've incorporated that into the recommendations. Well, we have
Show me
actually,
the words,
councillor.
please.
Okay, can we scroll down? See, recognise the, up to the top, sediment control for receiving environments. So anything in red, just sorry for people watching, this is probably a bit boring and tedious and you're wondering what on earth we're doing. Anything in red is what we've added subsequent to the recommendations appearing in the report. So we utilise the recommendations from Councillor Watson and Councillor Walker, which were pretty much in line with the requests that had come through from our community discussion yesterday. Some of these recommendations had already been changed in the light of the discussions with the community, and a couple of additions were made with the recommendations from Councillor Watson and Walker. As Chair, I'm satisfied that we have included the issues that you have raised, Councillor, and they are included in the recommendations. So everyone has seen quite clearly you've raised those issues, they're included in the recommendations, and my ruling is that that does what's requested. So we're now going to move on to the vote. Just before we take the vote, I'd just like to close this off by acknowledging our staff. I think it's Councillor Darby and Councillor Cooper put it well. There's been a huge amount of work that's happened in a very short time to get to this stage. This is action orientated. It certainly isn't business as usual, and I want to thank our staff who've been working on this. This is an incredibly sensitive receiving environment, and you know, over a decade ago there was an opportunity for the Auckland Regional Council to own this land, and that would have certainly dealt with a lot of the problems we're facing now. Sadly, that didn't happen, and we're trying now to do the very best for this wonderful environment and for the Hauraki Gulf. So let's get on, let's do the business, and let's finally get this work done. I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried.
No.
And you're happy, Councillor Lee and Councillor Walker? And what-
I don't want to
Watson?
vote against the recommendations, Madam Chair. Is it possible to just have a comment registering concern?
Look, we can note whatever we want. We can just note
Just
Councillor
note
Watson
concern with
raised concerns.
the report, thank you.
Okay. All right, that's... Yep. And we will move on. Thank you all. Megan, thank you very much. And thank you, members, for a thoughtful, if at times slightly stressful, discussion. We're just going to move on to our committee memos